Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank IREPAS staff for his kind invitation to do this presentation, because this will allow me to share with all of you the view that we have in Celsa Group about the international long products markets. I will start with a brief review of the macroeconomic situation and its relationship with the steel use. I will focus later in the construction sector and the steel industry situation. For sure, I will give you some figures of the long products consumption in the different areas of the world, focusing in Rebars, which is our main concern. And I will finalize with a review of the international price situation. So let's start with some information of the GDP of the world during the last 30 years. This information has been supplied by the International Monetary Fund, and you can see three lines in the screen. The blue line represents the GDP growth of the advanced economies during last years. The purple line represents the GDP growth of the of the emerging markets and developing countries. And the average of both of them, the brown line, represents the worldwide GDP in the past. At the right side of the screen, you can find a discontinuous line which represents the forecast of International Monetary Fund for the next year. So if we overwrite in this graph the apparent steel demand during the last 30 years, you can realize that there is a kind of correlation between steel demand and worldwide GDP growth. In the period of 1980-something to 2002, GDP growths in the world were around 3%, and therefore the steel demand slightly increased during this period. But on the contrary, between 2002 and 2007, and also in the period 2010-2014, we can observe a higher increase of the steel demand. So, if International Monetary Fund is correct in his forecast for the next years, we can expect a firm recovery of the steel demand in the coming years. Let's see the same information in a map. In front of you, you have the map of the GDP growth in 2016 in the different countries of the world. You can find some countries like Brazil or Russia that in 2016 were decreasing their GDP, and that's the reason why they are in a strong blue. Other economies like United States, Canada, and many countries in Europe were increasing between 0 and 3%, and that's the reason of the light blue. Spain, for example, was in light green, and that means that its GDP was growing between 3 and 6%. And of course, China and India with a strong green means that they were growing at more than 6%. So the picture last year was mixed, with some countries growing and others decreasing, but according to International Monetary Fund, for this year, the picture is completely different. You can see green almost all over the world, with the exception of those countries with a light blue. That means that are growing between 0 and 3%. So only small economies in the world this year will be with a negative GDP growth. So that's the reason why we are observing a recovery in the steel demand during this year, because all the economies of the world are growing at the same time. Picture for next year, according to International Monetary Fund, is even better. Let's say is greener, because if nothing strange happens, if not geopolitical tensions appear in front of us, the GDP growth of the world will be stronger next year. Because the contribution of the advanced economy, it's limited, it's only about 2% this year and the next one, but the contribution of the emerging markets and the developed economies will be the engine of the worldwide growth. So, ladies and gentlemen, my conclusion is that this year and the next one, we will have a healthy increase of the steel demand in the world. Picture for the year 2019 is even better. In 2016, it's expected this slowdown of the Chinese economy, and that's why it's changing the color from strong green to light green. But many countries in the Far East area, like Taiwan, Indonesia, will probably replace the demand of steel in the Far East area. So, first conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, probably we are in front of a long period of 5-6 years of a recovery, of a strong recovery of a steel demand that we have lost in 2014 and 2015, where steel demand was, let's say, stagnated. Let's review the construction sector. Long-term fundamentals for the construction sector remain solid. According to trimetric sources, global construction will grow for an average of 2.8% in the period of 2017-2021. That means a growth accumulated of 20%, and the output of the construction sector worldwide will surpass $10 trillion of US dollars in 2021. On the other hand, population of the world is increasing. By 2025. World population is expected to reach 8 billion people, and this means more needs of steel to cover the needs of those people. In addition, we are in the middle of a strong global urbanization trend, because today 54% of the population of the world is living in, let's say, in urban areas. But in 2050, this percentage will increase up to 66%. And the consumption per head of a person living in an urban area is higher than the consumption per head of a person living in a non-urban area. Of course, the gravity center of the world of the construction sector is moving to the east of the world. China overtook to the States in 2010 as let's say, the biggest construction market of the world, but it's expected that very soon India will have the third place, displacing Japan. It's true that it's expected, as I said before, a slowdown in China, but emerging countries, Asian emerging countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines represent today $350 billion, and their construction market is growing more than 6% annually. That there will be a kind of replacement in the future if China decrease or slow down more than decrease its construction output. So in this scenario, emerging markets will be the engine of the growth for global construction sector in the coming years, and in 2017 and 2018 are accelerating the pace of growth that had a valley in 2015. But if we have a look to short-term fundamentals, they are also good. Although Trump effect is lower than expected because infrastructure projects have not come. We are waiting, but it's also true that the construction sector has a healthy recovery in the States, mainly due to private building sector. Eastern Europe is recovering the growth also, the same than in Turkey, where construction is rebounding after the referendum. South America construction sector is coming back to black figures also this year. And ASEAN, the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, is becoming really a new player in the construction sector worldwide. The expected deceleration in China construction sector that all the, let's say, analysts of the sector were forecasting, till now, it has not happened. We will see the figures that the last presentation of this panel will give us, but the impression that we have is there is a kind of a small rebounding in the construction sector in China during the second part of this year. In fact, it's expected that, according to BMI source, that the construction output in China will grow this year 6.8%, higher than last year, and probably the effect of the 5 years plan will provide support also for the next year to have a growth of the construction sector in China of 6%. And this is very important for us because, ladies and gentlemen, China is 50% of the worldwide rebar consumption. And let's see how is developing the steel industry those days. This is the picture of the steel finished products demand for this year, and the next one is the forecast made by World Steel this April. You can realize that all areas of the world will be growing in the steel finished products demand this year. In fact, it's forecasted an acceleration for the next year, with the unique exception of Asia and Oceania, because World Steel is forecasting a slowdown in the Chinese steel consumption for the next year. These are the pictures that I showed you in the last IREPAS meeting that took place in Budapest. There, we forecasted, or I forecasted, that the consumption of the world will be 1,500 million tons according to World Steel. This spring, World Steel has updated its forecast and has increased up to 1,535 million tons. The key point is China. World Steel was forecasting a decrease in the Chinese consumption. Is the first column, the darkness one, which had a consumption of 681 million tons in 2016, and World Steel was forecasting a decrease to 652. Finally, they have upgraded their forecast, and now they are saying that this year the consumption in China will be the same, and they are delaying for the next year this slow decrease in China. We will see in next IREPAS meeting if this came to a reality or not. And what about the crude steel production? Well, if the steel demand is improving, obviously crude steel production has to increase also. The gray columns that you have in the screen represent the monthly crude steel production of the world. It's split in blue columns and purple columns. Blue columns represent rest of the world, and purple columns represent China. As you can see, from May-June 2016, worldwide crude steel production has recovered, is positive. The lines are above the 0x at the right side of the table, so we can observe that the crude steel production is increasing. In fact, there is an acceleration from June of the figures of Chinese crude steel production. This, of course, means a recovery of the crude steel capacity utilization ratio, because if steel production capacity doesn't increase, and that's the case because all of you know that in China a lot of induction furnaces have been shut down, and then this compensates in some way the new capacities that have been installed. This means that the crude steel capacity utilization ratio is higher than 70%. It's far away from 90% that we have in 2007, but it is true that it's better than 60-something that we have in year 2015 and the beginning of 2016. If we analyze which areas of the world are growing more in the production, you can realize that only these countries has slightly decreased their production this year, and the main growth you can find in, of course, in Asia. But at the same time that China and Asia are increasing their production of steel, they are reducing their exports. From May 2016, the accumulated decrease this year of steel export from China has been of 28.5%. So we have two possible explanation if the production is increasing in China at the same time that exports are decreasing. One is that their stocks are growing up. That is not the case. And the second, ladies and gentlemen, is that steel demand is growing in China during this year. The last figure is from the last month, from August, and you can see that export from China of steel products continue to decrease. So let's review some figures of the long products consumption. During the first half of this year, the apparent consumption for long products was around 400 million tons. So that means at the end of the year, we estimate that this will surpass 800 million tons. This means only 1% of rate growth, but this is enough to create, let's say, a good atmosphere in the market of growth of the long products demand if Chinese exported that, let's say, out of the market. If we split this consumption in the different products, we can see that Rebar has a consumption of 180 million tons in the first half of the year, wire rod 104, 27 for sections, and 89 for merchant bars. So at the end of the year, we can expect a worldwide Rebar's consumption of 360 million tons, which is slightly higher than the past year. Only 208 million tons of wire rod. Wire rod has decreased the consumption this year, 54 million for sections, the same figure than last year, and 178 for merchant bars. The product mix have slightly changed during the last year. Merchant bars has decreasing, benefiting Rebars. But today, in the first half of 2016, the percentage are as follows. Reinforcing bars are 45% of the long products consumption of the world, wire rod 26%, sections only 7%, and merchant bars 22%. And what about the different areas of the world? Well, in the first half of this year, European Union consumed 29 million tons, North America 19, 266 in East and Southeast Asia, 19 in Thailand and Turkey, and the rest of the world 66. So for this year, we can expect the figures that you have in the screen. I will focus in China because this for me is very important. The consumption of long products in East and Southeast Asia, not only in China, from our point of view, will be close to 540 million tons, having a small recovery compared to last year. So the percentage of the consumption in the different areas of the world is for long products, East and Southeast Asia, 67%, Turkey and these countries 5%, rest of the world 16%, European Union 7%, and North America 5%. Overall, as I said before, 1% of growth with some difference among regions. All regions of the world, with the exception of the rest of the world, are, let's say, growing. For the wire rod, as I said before, we can overall see a minus 2% of growth this year. East and South Asia are dragging the worldwide sections consumption, despite that the consumption will be 54 million tons like the previous year. And for merchant bars, apart from North America, the rest of the world is growing at a pace of 3%. But let's focus on Rebars. Well, Rebars has grown 2% this year, with the advanced economies, European Union, North America, with a growth of 3% and 2% respectively. In East and Far East Asia, 3%, and only the rest of the world was decreasing minus 1%. So the cake of the world today for Rebars is 68% for East and Far East. Is slightly higher than the percentage of total long products. European Union and North America only have a weight of 4%, CIS and Turkey 6%, and the rest of the world 19%. This is the Rebars consumption in the different areas of the world in the first half of this year. So if we multiply by 2, only making this multiplication, the consumption in the first half of this year, we will obtain a consumption figure of 360 million tons, with growth in all parts of the world. European Union will have a consumption of around 14 million tons, North America also the same figure, East and Far East Asia 244, CIS and Turkey 22, and rest of the world 67%. I will personally make a forecast for the next year. If we think that Rebar's consumption will grow between 2 and 3%, we will achieve a figure for the next year of 370 million tons, which be, ladies and gentlemen, the highest of the history. So as you can see, demand this year is there. I personally think that for next year will be also there. So let's enjoy the market. Some figures of production versus consumption. There was a deficit of 1 million tons in North America in the first half of the year, and exceeded in the European Union. China were more or less balanced with 100 million tons of consumption and 101 of production. These countries had an excess of only 1 million, Turkey 4 million, and rest of the world 8 million of deficit. If we add all the production figures and all the consumption figures, the addition is not the same, because we had a production of 2 million tons less than consumption. That means that during the first half of the year, the stocks all over the world decreased 2 million tons. And finally, let's focus in the international price situation to finish this presentation. When I did the last version of this presentation, I put the following figures for Rebar's price, wire rod and billets. Probably these prices are correct today. They have been done last week. Rebar's price, $540 FOB, wire rod $570, and billets $520 FOB. But what about the spread? The spread is the difference between the Rebar's price FOB and the scrap price CFR. In this slide, I have represented the monthly spreads from 2009. You can see that the black line represents the spread. You can see the amounts at the right axis of this table, and you can observe that it has ranged from 140 euros per ton, and the maximum was $250 per ton. Apparently, there is a big correlation between scrap, Rebar's price, and of course, spread. So what I did in this slide is to draw a dot for each monthly spread in relationship with the Rebar's price and the scrap price. The green dots, it's green in the screen, the green dots represent the Rebar's versus the scrap price, and the gray dots represent the spread versus Rebar's price. So you can realize that there is a big correlation between the three variables. So the correlation between scrap and spread is 0.79. This is the correlation index. And between Rebar's and spread is 0.88. And this is reasonable because till now, scrap has been the main driver of our cost, of the cost of the Rebar's producer. The rest of the costs were more or less stable. So what is driving our cost, and therefore the price that we can get from the market, was the scrap. But as I will tell you before, this, I think that can change in the future. This is the adjusted spread. It's, let's say, a bit more sophisticated number. Is the difference between the Rebar's FOB and the quantity in dollars per ton of scrap is needed to produce 1 kilo of Rebar's. We have a yield in our production process, because with 1 kilo of scrap we don't get a kilo of rebars, so we need an average of 1.13 kilos of scrap to get a kilo of rebars. So if we create this, let's say, adjusted spread, we see that the correlation with rebars price and scrap is lower. If we do the same exercise that before, and we draw all these dots of the spread, the adjusted spread in this case, with the scrap price, we see that the correlation is low. So this gives an idea that maybe the adjusted scrap till now has been a good, let's say, indicator to see the profitability of the steel producer, and in some way is independent of the scrap. If we do the same exercise with the rebars price, we see a better correlation, probably because when prices are very good, because the market is also good for us, we can get from the market, let's say, better spread, adjusted spread, in this case, independently of what is doing the scrap. So this was the rules of the rebars sector till now, but now we are in front of a disrupting phenomenon that we have afforded during the last weeks. We are suffering an impact in the rebars spread of other costs different from scrap. I suppose that all of you know that electrodes have multiplied their cost in recent weeks by 10. It's not only a question of price, it's a question of scarcity, because some mills are having some problems to get enough electrodes for his production, and that means that the cost of electrodes that in the past was between 2 and 3 euros per ton, today, ladies and gentlemen, is around 30 euros per ton. And the problem is not the current price, is that we don't know what is going to be the price in the next quarter, because all mills are trying to secure their electrode supply, but we have no idea of what price we will pay. Electrodes in the past was like iron ore some years. We have quarterly contracts or even yearly contracts, and the price was more or less stable. But I'm afraid that in the future, volatility will come to the electrode cost, and the price will be never the same that it was, and we will have another volatile input in our costs, not only scrap, but also electrodes. Ferroalloys has also doubled the price in some cases, especially the vanadium, and refractories are also having a problem of inflation. So, if this happens in the future, our cost structure will be different. You can see two columns saying our structure of cost, let's say in 2016, with the scrap, the yield that implies a higher cost of the scrap, electrodes, let's say a small bar, and then other costs. Today, we have an increase of cost of what we calculate today of approximately 40 euros per ton. Yield is higher than in the past because the scrap price is higher, and this is a new phenomenon that maybe is a disruption in our rebars business, because probably in the future, scrap price can go up, down, and prices can follow the scrap or not, because we will have another inputs that will go up and down independently of what is doing the scrap. So not only we are in front of a period of higher spreads to cover the cost, but also it will be more difficult to predict the reaction of the rebars producer having a look only to the scrap. We are in front of a phenomenon of decoupling, probably, of the rebars price with the scrap. And to finalize, the key points that I would like you to remember after this presentation are in the screen. It's true for me that the first key point is that fundamentals for steel long products remain solid following the urbanization trends and the construction sector outlook. This year and 2018, we expect a recovery in the reverse consumption worldwide. There will be, from our point of view, some kind of decoupling of billets and long products prices with the scrap due to the disruption created by electrode costs and increase and lack of availability of electrodes, because the raw material that we are employing for electrodes is not only used for this purpose. It's used also for the electric car batteries. And you know that the growth of the electrical car batteries in the future will be exponential. Nobody knows how many electric cars will be producing in 2-3 years' time. There is some estimation, but I am afraid that the chance of engines working with oil in the future will be more quick than expected, and we are in front of a lack of needed coke in the next months and years. That is the raw material used to produce ferroalloys. And also, this, of course, this forecast can change if the relationship between overcapacity in China and the growth deceleration in the construction sector change. This is a key point to follow. And of course, general geopolitical tension can change, of course, this brilliant scenario that we are in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. A positive outlook for demand in terms of demand, but question marks on the cost side. Any questions from the floor for Mr. Ray? Actually, I've got one quick question myself, if you allow me. Beijing has recently announced the cancellation of some infrastructure projects. What do you think about the short-term impact of this in terms of global demand?
China is always a black box. You know, it's very difficult to make forecasts. Microphone. Yes, excuse me. Yeah. China, I was saying that China is like a black box. Nobody believes that the steel capacity production will remain stable during the last year. Nobody was forecasting this small rebound in the construction sector in China. So we'll see. Because probably they don't have enough money to continue investing in the way that they were doing. But on the other hand, private initiative can in the future substitute the investment of the government, because the Chinese economy needs in the future to move for a, let's say, more open way. So for us, for the rest of the producers, it would be a bad news if the investment in construction in Chinese is a fact, but we'll see. Nobody knows, because China is a big country and they need a lot of steel, and we'll see.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? None, I guess.
Maybe we can ask to the speaker from China what opinion has about that. But it is really a key point, very important for all the people that is in this room, the evolution in China in the future.
There will be plenty of questions for him.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.